So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear participants, dear colleagues. I think now we can start. So, my name is Yoon Tzu. I'm from the Rotterdam Convention Secretariat. I'm based in Rome, FAO. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar on export notifications under the Rotterdam Convention. So, today there will be two presentations. The first presentation focuses on the obligations and procedures set out by the Convention. The second presentation is about the implementation of the provisions. There will be also opportunities for questions and discussion after the presentations. So you may also want to write your questions in the chat during the presentation. Either raise your questions after the presentations or write your questions in the chat anytime, also during the presentation. We would very much appreciate your active participation in the discussion. Now I'm delighted to invite my colleague Gerald Wiewer to give the first presentation. Some of you may know Gerald. He is the most experienced Secretariat member. His engagement in the Rotterdam Convention started in the later 90s when the convention text was negotiated. So Gerald, now the floor is yours, please.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And thank you, Yoon, for introducing and moderating this webinar today. As mentioned by Yoon, I will first give an overview on the export notification under the Rotterdam Convention. Before Yoon will, or after my presentation, Yoon will invite a representative of ECHA to continue with the second presentation. So the Rotterdam Convention basically has two key provisions. One important key provision is the prior informed consent procedure. And many of you are very familiar with the process of providing consent or not consent to the chemicals listed in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention. In addition to this prior informed consent procedure, the second main provision of the Rotterdam Convention is the information exchange provision. As we exchange a lot of information regarding hazardous chemicals under the Rotterdam Convention. And the export notification procedure under the Rotterdam Convention is part of this information exchange procedure. Now for today, I want to briefly introduce here the objectives of my presentations. First of all, we want to understand the export notification provisions of the Rotterdam Convention. We want to understand what is the role of the designated national authorities of the Rotterdam Convention. And we want to consider how the export notification procedure might be used as a source of information for banned and severely restricted chemicals. I would like to briefly introduce the key provision of the Rotterdam Convention as far as export notification is concerned. I would like to show you what is the process of export notification, what are the key players under this export notification procedure, and what is the role of the designated national authority. I will also highlight a few key documents, and then towards the end we will highlight some of the key points relating to the export notification process. Now, the key provisions relating to export notification are obviously the convention text, where we have the Article 12 regarding export notification, and this Article 12 of the Rotterdam Convention text outlines the responsibilities of the exporting and importing countries and the process to be followed. In addition to the Article 12 on export notification, the Convention text also contains Annex 5, which outlines the information requirements for export notification. And the Article 13 adds some information that has to be accompanied when chemicals are exported. And finally, I would also like to briefly mention that the Secretariat has developed an export notification form and a guidance, and that form, like all other documents, is also available from our website at www.pic.int. Now, what are the key elements of the export notification procedure? If a country that is party to the Rotterdam Convention bans or severely restricts a chemical, the designated national authority in the exporting country must notify the designated national authority in the importing country, basically when it exports such a chemical. And in response, the designated national authority in the importing country, which is party to the Rotterdam Convention, is to acknowledge receipt of the notification. So the exporting DNA will notify you of an export, and the importing country DNA will simply acknowledge the receipt of this notification. If there is no acknowledgement from the DNA of the importing country within 30 days, the DNA of the exporting country has to submit a second notification. Now, this obligation ceases when the chemical, remember that chemical is banned in the exporting country. When that chemical is included through the other process in Annex 3 of the Convention, and the importing country has provided an import response regarding that chemical, which was published in the PIC procedure, then obviously the obligation of the exporting country ceases, because at that time, all DNAs would have an import response. So the export notification procedure, according to the Rotterdam Convention, has also a timeline when it would cease. Now, what are the key elements of this export notification? As I said, it serves to exchange information. And under the export notification procedure, the exporting DNA has to inform the importing DNA on the name and address of the DNAs that are exporting and importing the chemical. They have to inform the importing DNA on the expected date of export, and they have to provide the name of the chemical or chemicals in case it's a mixture or the different levels of concentration. So it's the names of the DNAs, the date of the expected export, and the name of the chemical. They also have to indicate what category the chemical belongs to and for what purpose it is used in the importing country. The exporting DNA should also provide information on precautionary measures taken in the exporting country to reduce exposure and emissions. This makes it a bit more obvious why I'm saying it is an information exchange element, because the DNA from the exporting country has to inform the DNA in the importing country on precautionary measures. In addition, there will be further information provided as specified in Annex B and Annex 1, and any importing party may request additional information from the DNA in the exporting party. Now, there is no obligation to use a standard form, but based on the request, the Secretariat has developed a standard form for export notifications. Now, this form, which the Secretariat has made available on the website, is basically divided in 7 sections, and it's covering the information requirements of Annex 5 of the Rotterdam Convention, which contains information taken out of the final regulatory action of the exporting country. Then on page 1, we made a space to assign a reference number, which might help you in tracking the export. And the last page is the acknowledgement of the receipt, what the DNA of the importing party should sign and send back to the DNA in the exporting party. As far as information exchange is concerned, so in addition to the export notification procedure, the convention contains Article 13 on describing what type of information should accompany chemicals when exported. And in Article 13 it says, Article 13 says that chemicals when exported are subject to labeling requirements that ensure adequate availability of the information with regard to risks or human health hazards and the environment, taking into account relevant international standards. So it's kind of labeling requirements and risk information in line with international standards. Also, for chemicals which will be used for occupational purposes, a safety data sheet should be accompanying the export. And the safety data sheets are available. They follow internationally recognized format, and that should be sent to each importer when a chemical is exported. As far as practical, this information of the label and the safety data sheet should be given in one or more official languages of the importing party. So the exporting party is obliged to provide that information in a language, in an official language of the importing party. It's an obligation for the exporting party. Now let's briefly look on the process of export notification. For exports of chemicals which are banned or severely restricted in the exporting country, an export notification has to be sent to the DNA in the importing country. When the DNA of the exporting country has to send such an export notification prior to the first export after that country has taken a final regulatory action. So prior to the first export after the final regulatory action has been taken. And then after every calendar year before the first export takes place. Second step is the DNA of the importing country, which is obviously party to the Rotterdam Convention, has to acknowledge the receipt of this notification. So the DNA in the exporting country is awaiting the acknowledgement. If that acknowledgement is not being provided, then the DNA is not provided within 30 days, then the DNA of the exporting country has to resend that notification. But it does not have to wait. So the second time an export notification is sent, the one within 30 days, is also the last time in that calendar year. It will not require an acknowledgement of receipt. Here I would like to show you the flowchart. As mentioned, we have a party A, the one that is exporting, has banned a chemical, and it it has a request to export this to the party importing that chemical. So it will send an export notification and provide the information described in Annex 5 of the Rotterdam Convention. And that procedure ceases when that chemical is listed in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention, and when this importing party has provided an import response, which would either give consent or no consent to the import of an Annex 3 chemical. Now, I want to mention some critical points. The export notification obligation only applies to the country that has banned that chemical. If another party has not banned that chemical, it is not obliged to notify the export of the same chemical. Similarly, if the country that is exporting this chemical is not party to the Rotterdam Convention, then obviously that country, which is not party to the convention, is not obliged to send an export notification. What is the benefit of this export notification procedure? It assists the DNAs in the importing country to monitor imports of hazardous chemicals entering their country. They basically get a notification saying, hey, you are importing something that is banned in our country, but you seem to need that chemical. And here is the risk assessment and information regarding the risk of that chemical for your information. So you might start looking into this chemical and why it is still needed in your country. And there might be good reasons. For example, the exporting country might have a completely different crop pest complex. Let's take already the example of the EU. The EU is fortunate in terms of they do not have many major pests. There is no banana fusarium wilt, there is no desert locust, there is no fall armyworm so far, there is no cassava mosaic virus, and so on. So as there are certain pests do not exist in the exporting country, it might not need chemicals to control these. But other importing countries, which are sovereign countries, they might still need that chemical. And there is a valid right to import for the need of that chemical. That's why the export and import is absolutely permitted. The export notification procedure is only an information exchange, but DNAs of the importing country should use this information. For example, to assess the risks from the chemical in the importing country and eventually consider final regulatory action. I have to stress that it's not the purpose of the export notification to request a decision regarding the acceptability of individual shipments or imports of a chemical. It's not the purpose of that export notification to request a decision. The purpose is to inform the DNA of the importing party about the risks and hazards of the chemical that is being exported from a party where it is banned. And with this, I would like to come to an end of my presentation and give back the floor to Yoon. Let me stop sharing that and invite Yoon again to moderate that session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for the presentation. I've seen several questions in the chat room. Would you like to take up the questions now or after the second presentation? What do you prefer, Gerald? Gerald, you're muted.
Thank you, Yoon. I think we have a second presentation and then give the floor to responses and further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Gerald. Okay. So, dear participants, we will come back to your questions after the second presentation. As you may have noticed, the procedure of the export notification and information to accompany exported chemicals is designed in such a way that the communication goes directly between the exporting and importing parties, so it doesn't involve the Secretariat in the communication. With other words, the Secretariat doesn't really know when and what was communicated. Therefore, we invited a party to share their experience on the implementation of the provisions. So now I'm delighted to invite Mr. Rémy Lefebvre from the European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, to give the second presentation on EU export notification and EU's explicit consent procedure. So Mr. Rémy Lefebvre is the team leader of the PIC operational team at the European Chemicals Agency. He's based in Helsinki, Finland, and he's French and a process engineer by education. He has been working in the field of chemicals management since 15 years, both at the European Commission and at ECHA. He has been dealing first with the ECHA REACH regulation and since April 2019 with the PIC regulation. So, Mr. Rémy Lefebvre, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you. I'm very pleased to be here and indeed to have the opportunity to exchange a bit more on our experience and way of implementing the Rotterdam Convention within the European Union. I hope you can see my slides now, and if so, if not, just let me know. Otherwise, I will now start. So, my main objectives for today are twofold. First of all, I would like to present you all the Rotterdam Convention is implemented within the European Union, the main specificities of the EU regime as compared to the Rotterdam Convention provisions, and finally, to go a bit more into the details, as Gerald did already at convention level, on the EU export notification and explicit consent procedure. But, and then, of course, what is maybe even more important at the end of the session is to receive your questions, feedback, comments on the way you are actually receiving information from the EU and giving responses or reactions. So the Rotterdam Convention in EU law. The Rotterdam Convention was ratified by the European Union in December 2002. And then after that, it was implemented via different EU regulations, starting with the first one in number 304 in 2003, then replaced by a second one in 2008, and finally the currently in place regulation, which is usually called the EU PIC regulation, which was adopted in 2012. As mentioned in my previous slide, the first and immediate objective of the EU regulation is to implement and to adopt to implement the Rotterdam Convention into EU law. But more generally, the PIC regulation is in line with the Rotterdam Convention, aims at promoting shared responsibility and cooperation in the international movement of hazardous chemicals, and this is in a way transposed in practice in the mechanisms for exchange of information, namely the export notification, acknowledgement of receipts, and PIC procedure. The EU PIC regulation also aims at protecting human health and the environment by providing all importing countries with information on characteristics of hazardous chemicals and how to store, transport, use, and dispose of such chemicals safely, and by that to contribute to the environmentally sound use of hazardous chemicals at global level. Now, what are the differences between the EU PIC regulation and the Convention? In various aspects, the EU PIC regulation goes a bit beyond or far beyond the provisions of the Rotterdam Convention. Firstly, the EU notifies its exports of hazardous chemicals to all countries in the world and not only to the parties to the Convention. Secondly, the number of chemicals which are covered by the PIC regulation is larger than under the Convention. The structure of the PIC regulation is different in that it further divides the use categories under the Convention into 4 subcategories, which also implies that more chemicals are listed. While the Annex 3 of the Convention lists about 52 chemicals, the Annex 1 of the PIC regulation lists currently a total of almost 230 chemicals or groups of chemicals. And the same in terms of explicit consent procedure, we have a far more important number of chemicals which are also subject to that specific procedure. Finally, the EU also requires an export notification irrespective of the intended use in the country of destination, and not only for the use in which the chemical is either banned or severely restricted. And the reasoning behind is that because it cannot be guaranteed that the declared use in the export notification will correspond to the actual use in the importing country. So in order to make sure that this information is still received by the importing country, irrespective of the use, and in case a different use is actually made in the importing country, we are still sending export notifications. The scope. The PIC regulation applies to chemicals that are either banned or severely restricted in the EU for health or environmental reasons. Those chemicals are regulated as active substance in plant protection products or biosolids products, including disinfectants, insecticides, and parasiticides. The PIC regulation also applies to some industrial chemicals which uses are restricted under the EU REACH regulation. The PIC regulation also lists chemicals which are banned for export from the EU. Those are mainly persistent organic pollutants, which are also regulated at global level under the Stockholm Convention, and also mercury compounds in line with the Minamata Convention. What is important for you also as importing countries to know is that the annexes of the PIC regulation are updated generally once a year, which means that additional substances are every year subject to the PIC regulation, and therefore to one or two of the following procedures that I will be presenting to you. The last amendment was applicable as of last September, with 22 new substances added there. And the next amendment is currently foreseen for mid or the second part of 2021. The PIC network in the EU. It's also important for you to know why you are receiving communications potentially from different actors in the EU, and all these actors are working together. DG Environment of the European Commission acts as the common EU designated national authority under the PIC Convention. But on top of the European Commission, we also have EU member states of the EU who are also at EU level designated to be responsible for the implementation of the PIC regulation and work in close cooperation with Commission and with us at ECHA. ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, provides assistance in the implementation of the PIC regulation to the different actors involved. So now moving to the two main procedures, export notification and explicit consent procedure. If we start with the explicit with the export notification procedure, I will now be coming back to the Article 12 of the Rotterdam Convention, and without repeating all in details, this article foresees that an export notification is provided prior to the first export of the chemical, and that the importing party should acknowledge in return receipt of the first export notification received after adoption of the final regulatory action. One important point here is to realize that the EU is requesting an acknowledgement of receipt for any subsequent export notification that is submitted for that chemical. So we keep on sending at least once a year export notifications for those chemicals, and then expecting to receive in return acknowledgement of receipt. So the export notification procedure as implemented by the EU, in this case, ECHA is providing the importing country with the export notification as a preferred channel via email, but when not possible, by postal mail, surface mail, or by fax in very limited number of cases. In return, we are, as said, expecting to receive the acknowledgement of receipt as per the convention anyway. The acknowledgement of receipt, either by the completed form, which is attached to the export notification template, or by simple reply to ECHA's original email, should be sent back to us within 30 days. And if it's not the case, it will be sent again a second time to you. So the form is basically the same as what was already presented with the different sections. I won't go through the different sections in detail, but I wanted to show both the first page that you are probably seeing when receiving our communications, and the last page, which is that form for acknowledgement of receipt that we are expecting to receive in return. A few important to know messages regarding export notifications, also based on the questions that we have been, or comments we have been receiving from some imported DNAs in non-EU countries, importing countries. The first of all is the acknowledgement of receipt. It's returning it does not imply the acceptance of the import. It is for us just an indication, a confirmation that the notification has been well received. So it's a confirmation that the communication between us, exporting country, and you, importing one, is functioning. The acknowledgement of receipts can, as I said, be sent back usually via the form, but can also be done by a simple return of email if the printing, filling in, sending back of the form is of any difficulty for you. And EU is expecting to receive acknowledgement of receipt, as said, for each export notification that is provided. For certain substances, which are banned, several restricted within the EU, but under only one subcategory of a convention use category, the export cannot be blocked by the EU. So we have rather often comments from importing countries suggesting that they cannot accept the import of that of a given chemical, and if that chemical which is not listed under the convention, but is listed under the EU regulation, is just listed under what our part one only of the Annex 1 of the PIC regulation, EU PIC regulation. We cannot block it actually, and so we have to explain to you that the export notification is only a way to inform you, but we don't have any legal basis to block the export. However, of course, if in return you are informing us that if the chemical, when it will reach your territory, will be blocked, we can inform the member state DNA, and then in cascades the exporter about it. And it might, I think it happens in many cases, most often, that in the end the export will not take place if the exporter knows that the export can leave the EU but will not reach your territory. The second element is the expected amounts of the substance mixture is an estimate in that export notification template where you're seeing the expected amount of the substance in section 3.2. It's an estimate, an indication of what is expected at the moment the notification is made by the exporter of what will be exported to your country. It's not the actual amount, and that will only be known later. So it can be actually less than what is put in the section 3.2 of the export notification, but can also be more. And finally, it's important to also have in mind that we have the principle of one notification per substance or formulation per importing country per year. So unless it is specifically required by the importing country to receive all of the export notifications, we are not resending an export notification which would be made by, for instance, another EU exporter for the exports to your territory of the very same chemical during a calendar year. And even if it is exported in the EU by a different company, even if it is imported in your country by a different importer than the initially one, the one which was initially mentioned in the export notification that you received. And also if it's imported for other specific uses than the initial one, as long as it remains within the same category. So of course, if you have received an export notification for the imports into your territory of a chemical to be used as a pesticide, and later on we receive a second export notification for the same use, for the same substance to your country, but for industrial chemical uses, then you will receive that one because it's a different category. But if it's a second one for the same pesticide category, then you will not receive it again. Also, something important is to make a distinction between the information that you have on the uses which are allowed and made in the EU versus those that are expected to be made in your country. The section 6 of the export notification is explaining what is all the substance or the chemical is regulated within the EU. And this is what you can see that in section 6.1 and 6.2 of export notifications, which shouldn't be mixed up with the uses in section 3, which is a description of all the chemical that is imported to your country is expected to be used in your country. And this is the section 3.3 in particular, where you should find more detailed explanation of what is the expected use to be made in your territory. Now, moving to the explicit consent procedure, it is important to note that the explicit consent requirement applies to a subset of chemicals only. And in addition to the export notification requirement, which applies to all chemicals which are listed under the EU PIC regulation. That is the reason why for certain chemicals, you will receive both an explicit consent request and an export notifications, while for others, you will only receive an export notification. The explicit consent procedure, it applies when the chemical is listed in Annex 3 to the Rotterdam Convention, and if the importing country didn't provide yet an import response, or the importing party already provided a response, but for a use category that is different to the one for which the export notification is made and the export is foreseen, or the importing country is not party to the convention. It also applies when the chemical is not listed in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention, but it is banned or severely restricted in the EU in the convention use category. So this is the reason why you're receiving more explicit consent requests for more chemicals than those which are listed under the convention. It's because we have extended these requirements to more chemicals. So how it works, you initially receive the consent not anymore from ECHA at the first points, but from a member state DNA, basically from the member state from which the initial export notification, so the request to export that chemical has been made. And the explicit consent response is then requested to be sent back to that member state designated national authority. But in the absence of your response, a reminder is sent twice, actually after 30 days and then after 60 days after the initial request. And that one, we are taking the step then to send you the reminder. This is the form basically that you should be used to if you recognize. And as I did before, some important to know information about explicit consent requests, some clarification and tips. In the absence of a response to the request for an explicit consent, the export from the EU is blocked. So this is why it is different from the export notification, which, as I said, is not, we cannot block at that point in time, but for those substances which are subject to the explicit consent request procedure or requirement, this is a blocking point. So you have a way by responding no to the to our request to block the export from the EU. The explicit consent response should reflect the national legislation for the notified chemicals. So basically, it shouldn't be importer specific and it should apply. So the importer specific details mentioned in the export notification should normally not influence your response. It's a more generic response that we're expecting from you on whether or not you generally allow the exports from EU to your country of that chemical. I think basically that was the most important thing. So if I come to the conclusions, I wanted to show you a few statistics about, for the last 2 years, the number of export notifications that we sent to non-EU importing countries and what we got as response, and the same for explicit consent requests. And this is to highlight that we have over time, we have systematically a certain drop in between the number of communications that we are making and the return communication that we have from you, be it acknowledgement of receipt for export notifications or response to explicit consent requests for explicit consent requests. So this is also important, and I will come back to that soon. The importance of for us receiving return communication from your side. So few take-home messages. Please confirm that the exchange of information is working by acknowledging the reception of EU export notifications. We recognize that you might receive quite a lot from us in certain cases, and it's some work to be able to process our notifications and respond to them. If you have any problem, any questions, please do not hesitate to come to us, but it's very important that we get that confirmation that you received it. And take the full advantage of the PIC procedure, so please respond to explicit consent requests, and especially if you do not agree with the import to your country, please let us know. It's also important that we keep let's say, a good track of your contacts, of the official contacts that we should have in the importing countries. So it's important, and for us, and I think I can also talk on the name of the Secretariat, also to have, for them, it's important to have it. So please update your contacts, and at least when it's with us, to send it to that email address. And also, please keep in mind that the explicit consent procedure is a procedure that is dealt between authorities. So responses that are provided to us by companies are not valid. We sometimes receive responses from companies, private companies, so the importer, the exporter, and that is not valid for us. We really need to have the response coming from you, authorities in the importing countries, to be able to take them into account. And of course, please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or comments. With that, you will be distributed the slides. So I have also added a few links, useful links to where you can find information. So I hope this can also be useful to you. With that, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to receive any questions or feedback from your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Remy, and thank you, Gerald and Remy, for your very interesting and informative presentations. As you already made very clear, communication and information exchange is a two-way process. So we hope with today's webinar, we can help to improve the communication between exporting and importing parties. Before open the discussion, I would like to make an announcement. So as you may have seen in the chat, after today's webinar, we will send you a copy of the presentations together with a link of a questionnaire. So the questionnaire is to seek your feedback to the webinar of today in order to help us improving our work. And it's very short, the questionnaire. It takes 2 to 3 minutes to complete it. So if you could please complete the questionnaire right after the webinar, it would be great. So we have seen quite a bit of questions in the chat room, which is really great because we appreciate your active participation. And I would like to probably start with those questions in the chat room. And of course, you can continue typing questions in the chat room, and you can also raise your hand to make interventions. So if you allow me, I would like to start with the questions in the chat room. The first would be, should the safety data sheet provided by the exporting country follow the GHS format? So I would like to direct the questions to my colleague, Gerald or Remy. Gerald, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, thank you, Yoon. And the answer is, the convention says it has to be in an internationally accepted format. So the GHS format is a very specific one. It is not necessary to provide it in the GHS format, but it is necessary to provide it in a format that is accepted internationally.
Thank you, Gerald. The next question, so let's say the first few questions are more directed to the first presentation. It's just, captured during your presentation. What happened if the importing party don't accept the export chemical? I think this question has been probably already answered by Remy in his presentation, but Gerald, would you like to still say something to that question?
Yes, from the point of Rotterdam Convention, the export notification procedure is only an information exchange, as said before. So the DNA is informed that something will come. Under the Rotterdam Convention, there is no further assistance to the importing country on that. Now, Remy has indicated that if the importing country gets back to the exporting country, there might happen something. But under the Rotterdam Convention, it's not that the exporting country would be obliged to take back the chemical. It's not like that. It's an information exchange.
Okay, thank you, Gerald.
Then we have the next question, which is the official language.
Yes.
And I think I have to separate here. The convention operates in 6 official UN languages, and it's not specified in which of the 6 official UN languages the export notification has to be. However, I was talking about additional information to accompany chemicals when exported. That's Article 13. And there, yes, indeed, Article 13 says this information has to be in an official language of the importing country. So that's an obligation for the exporting party. Yes, they have to provide additional information in line with Article 13 in one official language of the importing country.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. I think it's quite clear. The next question is again about communication, whether the acknowledgement of receipt of export notification can be done by email, or is it necessary to fill the last page of the form?
No, it says they have to acknowledge receipt, and I think nowadays we would accept that acknowledgement can also be done by other means. It does not necessarily have to be as a hard copy.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. Then there are 2-3 questions that are quite similar. If a country allowed importation of one product, for how long this authorization is valid?
Yeah, that's the convention is very clear. It says the exporting country has to notify the importing country once in a calendar year prior to the first export in that year. So it's always valid, at least for that full calendar year. And if another export is scheduled to take place in the subsequent year, then another export notification would be required. So it's limited to 1 calendar year, but it's obligatory prior to any new export in any new calendar year.
Thank you, Gerald. The next question, I think, in fact, was already addressed by Remy, but nevertheless, it asks us what happens when an export notification is received for a product that is not registered in the importing country. This seems to be a quite common concern. So, Gerald, would you like to still reply to this question specifically?
Yes, a bit along the line what I said before. Under Rotterdam, it is an issue for the country that is importing the chemical. If it is not registered, then of course one wonders how did the importer get an importation permit? Because he ordered something, and before he orders, one would assume that he gets an official permit to import that. So if it is not registered, the registrar of that importing country has to, first of all, acknowledge the export notification, but then follow up. Why is it not registered? Is it banned? Or do we have to evaluate the risk and eventually ban it? I mean, there are always 2 sides. One is it registered? The other question, is it banned? If it is not banned, what action would be required from the importing country?
Yeah.
If I may on this one also with the practical side of it, as I was explaining, when it's about export notifications, as we are receiving quite often comments back from the importing country or information that that chemical is not registered or even banned in their country. And the thing that we are doing is we're taking good note and then transmitting this information to, in the end, the EU exporter. So then the EU exporter can actually decide what is the next action. Usually they would try to get in touch with their importer in the importing country to try to solve the issue, to figure out what's happening before they would probably take the risk of exporting, having the situation that their chemical is blocked when entering the territory of the importing country. What is very important, actually very useful for us as information from the importing country authorities, is precisely to explain sometimes a bit further what is the status, regulatory status of that chemical in the importing country. If it's not registered but can be put on the placed on the market, if, for instance, the importer has registered, then it's different than it is banned. And it's also very important for us because then we can then transmit this information, and it's easier for the exporter in the EU to solve the issue.
Yeah, thank you very much, Remy and Gerald, for your very clear answers to those questions. I think we need to keep in mind that the provision of export notification and information exchange in the Rotterdam Convention serves for the purpose of, to assist countries to better manage the potential hazard of those chemicals. So I have here a question which is probably a bit more general, and that goes beyond the export notification provision. It says, what does our country must do for chemicals missed in Annex 3? Gerald, would you like to address this question?
The chemicals and pesticides listed in Annex 3 require that the designated national authority of every party provides an import response regarding that chemical and the category of the chemical. So Annex 3 chemicals require an import response from every party to the Rotterdam Convention.
Okay. Thank you, Gerald. The next question is addressed to the first presentation, but probably is also more at practical level, and probably Remy would also like to add something. The question is, the export notification is mainly about information for the importer party, but sometimes the received information do not corresponding with the register or authorizations of those compounds in the importing party. This situation is frequently in the EU notifications. What is the recommendation for the best answer from the importing party? I think it's a quite practical question. Remy, would you like to pick up this one?
I think I won't be deviating much from what I already said, that information in return is important for us to know what is the mismatch between what is recorded in the export notification as the conditions and uses of the import, expected uses, expected amounts, expected importer, and if this doesn't fit with the regulatory scheme in the importing country, it's very important for us to know. So then we can indeed return the information to the EU DNA of the exporter and to the exporter, so they know about it, and sometimes can actually clarify in their future export notifications the things. We, for instance, have quite often reaction from importing countries stating that the importer that is mentioned in their in the export notification that we are communicating is not aware of that import, or is not registered, is not authorized to import. one important thing, as I said, is that the export notification is the expression of in an
It seems to be very cold in Finland, so I think the line is really frozen.
Yeah.
Literally frozen.
Yeah.
Yun,
yeah, probably sorry, Gerald.
Yeah, we are waiting for Remy to come back. There was one simple question is regarding the languages of this webinar. And yes, we have scheduled a Spanish language webinar on export notification, as well as a French language webinar on export notification. In about a month's time, we have one, and 2 months' time, the second one. And we would like to invite, obviously, everybody to regularly check the website of the Basel, Stockholm, Rotterdam Convention, where there is an explicit calendar of webinars, and you will find the program with the confirmed elements of our program. Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you, Gerald, for that clarification. Yeah, in fact, there are several questions related to French and Spanish version. So the next question is, in fact, again, specific to the export countries. So unfortunately, we don't have Remy now for the time being. He's somehow disconnected. Let me see whether we can pick up some questions that is probably more general.
Yun, there is the last question from Ms. Paulette Ramsey is regarding updating the register of designated national authorities and whether ECHA will get hold of it. Unfortunately, we are updating the Rotterdam database as soon as we get that information, but it is official, it's only published officially every 6 months through the PIC circular and the attached list of designated national authorities. And the ECHA and the EC is taking only then they are taking action. So unfortunately, there is a delay, which means only every 6 months, any DNA will get the update of the register of designated national authorities. Otherwise, they would have to check the Rotterdam Convention website and get the updated information directly from our website. But I don't think that's being done. They use the semi-annually published register of designated national authorities.
Yeah.
Thanks, Yun.
Thank you very much. Well, there are a few questions here in the chat room that are really, I think, quite specific to the exporting parties, to Remy. He's still trying to get connected with us.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you very much, Remy, for getting back to us. There are a few questions, I think, rather specifically for exporting party or the EU, waiting for you.
Okay.
So is it normal to receive the notification of export from a company directly and not from the DNA of the exporting countries?
No, this is not normal. And if you do it, please let us know, because as I was explaining, the export notification, you should receive it from ECHA, those coming from the EU, and exclusively from ECHA. So this is very important, that if you experience that, to first of all to explain to the company who gave it to you that it's not the proper way of doing it, and then to also, if possible, explain, inform us, so they can so then we can try to clarify the situation as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We would like to know why the EU considers veterinary drugs as part of your PIC procedure, and how this is compatible with those established by the Rotterdam Convention, considering that their scope does not include those compounds.
So we are now getting to the deep details of the subcategories we're having for subcategories of uses that we're having established under the EU PIC regulation. But under pesticides, we are actually having two subcategories: the pesticides, so the plant protection products, basically, and then other pesticides. And under that, we are classifying biocides, because we have an EU biocide regulation, and also other type of pesticides like insecticides, some of them, and also some parasiticides. And so not all veterinary products, but at least those ones. And indeed, we are covering these uses and some of the substances which are used for that, and under the PIC regulation, and that's the reason why we are sending export notifications for this for the export of these substances as well. So indeed, it's not covered under the convention, but it's covered under this extended scope, as I was presenting, of the EU PIC regulation.
Thank you. The next question: can we no consent for a product even if we don't have national regulation for this product? I guess this was the question.
Yeah,
okay.
I know. I think this is also a well-known topic known by the Secretariat. It's indeed sometimes difficult we acknowledge that from certain countries to respond to and possibly negatively to explicit consent requests if they don't have yet, in particular, a specific regulation, legislative, regulatory basis to do that. So what is important for us is to actually, from our side, is to know whether or not there is actually the possibility to export. And this is, in the end, we need to have a sign to be able to translate the words, the response from the importing country, to be able to decide whether or not the export can take place. So it's the devil is in the details sometimes, but what is here is that what we need to know is if basically the importing country is accepting the imports, even if they don't have necessarily a very strict and established regulatory background for that.
Okay, thank you. The next question: the export can be blocked only when the country denies the explicit consent, or even when the country does not send a reply? Remy, please.
So when there is no reply to no response to the explicit consent request, and as I said, there is a first one sent, a second one, and third one, so two reminders. After 60 days, so two reminders, the exporter, the EU exporter, can still suggest what we call a waiver proposal. So a waiver to the non-response of the importing country, but the conditions are very strict there. So to have the waiver proposal accepted, and therefore the export to be allowed from the EU, there is a need for providing evidence, supporting evidence, showing that basically the product, the chemical, has been authorized in the country, in the importing country. So we need to have, for instance, official certificates, copy of certificates from official sources of the importing country, etc., which basically would show that if we didn't receive a response, it's because the importing country for any reason didn't manage to respond to us, but there is a clear evidence from that the EU exporter can bring to show that actually the substance is authorized in the for the expected use in the importing country. But this is clearly the exception to the norm and not the opposite. So it's a very limited number of cases, and it should be very solidly supported by evidence before the decision is in the end taken by the European Commission to waive the non-response and to allow the export.
Thank you. So the next question, we usually receive the explicit consent from the DNA of the exporter and not from ECHA. So the request for explicit consent, I guess, should we explicit consent response, should we reply, give the response to ECHA as well, or only to the DNA of the exporting country, let's say?
I think at least one of them, and then we can, as I said, we are working hand in hand with the EU member states DNA, so we can inform each other. This is what I was presenting in that slide with the different steps of the explicit consent procedure. It's true that the first sending is made by the member state DNA in which the exporter is established. So if it's in Germany, for instance, the explicit consent request, initial one, will come from Germany. And then if there is no response, it's then when ECHA enters into the game and would just send the reminders from an administrative point of view. But the response can be provided normally initially to the DNA, but it can also be to us. And if we receive it, we basically pass it to immediately to the member state DNA so that they can record the response, and then we can basically take action regarding the exports which are foreseen.
Okay, thank you, Remy. The second part of the same question is, my question is especially regarded when we deny a consent for a specific substance because the intended use declared is not allowed in our country, although the substance itself is not banned.
Then it's denied. Basically, then we have the responses made by importing countries in the form can allow the form allows and enables the importing countries' authorities to really clarify the scope of the response. Basically, if the response, in particular if it's positive, whether it's only for pure substance or for mixtures, and if it's for mixtures, in which concentration of the big chemical, and then also explaining what could be the additional restrictions to the positive response, meaning that it's only for certain uses, for certain companies, etc. So you can basically in the response capture the response. Normally, the initial explicit consent request is triggered by an export notification with a specific use. So a response can be given to that use in particular, but also the response is more generic. Basically, when we trigger at EU level an explicit consent request, is to know what is the response of the importing country in general to the import of that chemical, as it would be in the import response under the convention for Annex 3 substances. So basically, we're trying to cover the same as would have been done for Annex 3 substances under the convention for the other substances that we are putting under the requirement of explicit consent. So it can also cover more widely, and then we will see, depending on the actual export notifications that we're receiving, whether those can be accepted, can be activated, or they cannot, depending on the response and the scope of the response given by the importing country.
Thank you very much, Remy. that's all the questions that I have seen in the chat room. Now I would like also to give a last call for participants to raise questions. If you still have some questions, please raise your hand. You can also speak directly. I don't see any hand raised, so I assume that there is no more questions to the presenters. No, Chris, please, yeah. Chris, you are muted. Please go ahead, Chris.
Hello? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Chris. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, this is Christopher from Zambia. I'm the DNA for Zambia.
Hello,
I just wanted to, to thank the two presenters. This information is very useful for all of us here as DNA. I just want to find out some of these notifications, they would come, but you have not issued the let's say the import permit to that company, and then you have this notification coming. So I just wanted to indicate that such has happened before, and so as a DNA, you do allow consent based on the product is registered, but that particular company doesn't have the permit to bring it into the country. So I just wanted to make that clarification. I'm clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, just maybe I can just react to that, saying that's indeed it's well identified and quite common, and it's indeed what I was trying to explain before, that it's very important for us to be informed about that in return to our export notification when acknowledging receipt. The importing country can just explain that basically there is, okay, we take note of the export so to import to our territory, but please be aware and make the exporter in the EU aware of the fact that it can only be then entering our territory if and reaching the importer that you mentioned in the export notification, if that importer has an authorization to do it and to use it. So then we pass this information once again to the EU exporter, so then they can make sure that this will be made, or they would take the risk that basically their exports is blocked at some point when reaching the importing country.
Thank you very much, Remy. And I see a new question here in the chat room. From Kenya, sometimes we get reminders on explicit consent requests on already responded ones. Would you please confirm whether the problem is our email or our response doesn't go to the right email? Remy?
It could indeed be a problem of a pure technical problem of communication, because normally if we have received the response, we automatically stop the reminders. So normally reminders shouldn't be sent to if the response was given. It might happen that there is a timing issue, and if, for instance, we receive just at the moment where the reminder would be sent, then maybe that would collapse, and then still on the same day we receive and we record the response, and the reminder is still sent. But it shouldn't be the norm once again. So if it's very often, please send us an email to the email I put in the presentation, so then we can further investigate and try to understand what could be the problem behind that.
Thank you, Remy. Okay, here the last question. Please, yes, Carmen. Would you like to speak or put your question in the chat? Okay, I see one more question popped in. Export notifications for Mauritius are still being sent to the former DNA. What can be done about it? Well, probably first, please make sure that your DNA contact is updated with the Secretariat. So if you have changed the DNA, please inform the Secretariat so that we can update our database. Make sure that exporting countries can communicate to the right authority. Can the DNA of a country submit the form? Which form do you mean, Carmen? Pick. So we have export notification form, we have other forms, we have importing response form, we have notification form, export notification. Gerald, would you like to answer this question?
It's not really clear to me what is meant, but certainly the form which is posted on our website can be used also to acknowledge receipt. It's not very clear.
Yeah, thank you. It depends which form is meant, whether it's the export notification form, which is sent by the DNA of the exporting party, or the form of acknowledgement of receipt of the export notification form, which is sent by the DNA of the importing country. Here, okay, request for explicit consent to export a chemical to your country in accordance with EU implementing. Okay, this question from Carmen is now getting more specific from Suriname. I think to EU, under the Rotterdam Convention, request for explicit consent to export a chemical to your country in accordance with EU implementing legislation.
If I understand the question, I would say it's not a can, it's a should. It's, as I said, the explicit consent procedure is between authorities. So we EU, be it the EU member state DNA or ECHA, are sending the request to the authority of the importing country, and we are expecting the authority of the importing country to respond to us directly to the authorities. So yes, this is exactly what should be done. And on the contrary, that shouldn't involve companies, private companies. So if it was also the question, the only channel is between authorities.
Okay, thank you, Remy. I hope Carmen, Remy clarified your questions. Okay, that's clear now. Thank you very much, Carmen. I see a message from Dr. Gaia. I think the same question regarding the former DNAs. It is updated already. Thanks. All export notification I'm getting up till now is from the former DNA. I guess from your own country, you mean? Yeah, update of DNA information is really crucial, especially for the smooth communication on export notifications. So in fact, we really, if you notice any outdated date, please contact us by email, contact the Secretariat by email, because we need to also to verify the updates, right? Because the contact or the authority is, it's a quite official issue, who is the DNA in the country, and the legal office in the Secretariat will verify any notification of updates and will do it accordingly. Or if there is any need for more information, the legal officer will also contact you, will get back to you. So please, if you experience any inconsistency of DNA contact, then send email to the secretariat. I see one more. No, just thank. Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any further hand, and yeah, there is also no further questions in the chat room. So one more message. Okay, sorry, there is one more question. In maintaining the database in the importing country, does it need one agency to collect all information, since there are other agencies regulating different chemicals? So this is rather a question about how the information should be managed in the importing country. I guess this is quite national specific, but nevertheless, Gerald or Remy, would you like to comment to this question?
Well, let's say there is no limit on the number of designated national authorities per country. So I can imagine that there are several designated national authorities, and then the question might be, to whom would the export notification be sent? And maybe Remy can share some light on that.
Yes, this is indeed, it's the same for us. We don't, we usually have different contacts. So just because of, we have usually at least two types of contacts on pesticide side and on the industrial chemical side, we have often, not usually, but very often different contacts. And even under each category, we have different contacts, several contacts in the importing country. So we are sending our communications to different contacts we have, based on of course what is available from the Secretariat website, and any other information we would have received also from the countries themselves. What is very important for us, it's not a problem to send too many contacts actually, but it's still very important for us to make sure that we are sending to the right ones and the most updated ones, and better to send to only one who is really the right contact for a certain category or subcategory of chemicals, and that we can make sure that that contact will respond, react to our communication, than sending to too many and we don't know from whom to expect the response. So if in practice and really at the moment, there are several agencies, several organisms in charge of receiving information and responding to information under the Rotterdam Convention, it's perfectly fine with us to have different contacts, but please make sure that those are then kept updated, and we are all on the same page on to whom we should be addressing our communications.
Thank you very much, Remy, for your answer. I think we have been now far beyond the scheduled time, and I would like to again thank Gerald and Remy for their very informative presentations, and thank to all participants for your active participation. I think the presentations and in particular the discussion here helped us to better understand the procedures, and that will I think greatly improve the communication of this information exchange provision of the convention. I think the last question really opened up a new perspective, namely what to do at national level in the importing countries with those exporting notifications that you have received. So I think this could be like a take-home message for DNAs in importing countries to think about how to make best use in your country with the information submitted through export notification to better manage the chemicals in your country to help protect human health and environment from hazardous chemicals. So again, thank you very much for your active participation. and we look forward to your feedback in the questionnaire. I would like to again ask Gerald and Remy whether you have any further message here before I close today's session.
Thank you, Yoon, and thank you, participants. Nothing else to add, just stay safe and please acknowledge the export notifications. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot also from our side. It was a great opportunity to present the way we are implementing the convention, and also to respond to these all very valid questions, and to do it in a very efficient way, targeting quite many of our regular contacts in one go. And the same for us. Stay safe and please keep in touch with us. Thank you.
And one final comment, Yoon. Javier just sent around the questionnaire. So before you log off, please open the link to the questionnaire concerning that webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Gerald. Yes, you have the link to the questionnaire in the chat room now, and yeah, please help us to improve our work in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.